Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Culinary Fitness. My name is Chef Dennis Berry, and we're gonna make some beef bourguignon today. So, you know, a lot of people call this beef stew. You can call it beef burgundy. I like calling it beef bourguignon. It's the way I was taught in culinary school 20 years ago. You know, it's really kind of, we're gonna make this in a crock pot, a slow cooking beef bourguignon today, okay? So it's gonna take 8, 9, 10 hours. We'll see how it goes, right? So look at this. Some people call this a pot roast, right? So we're gonna make it in beef bourguignon style. So if you were to, you could put this whole thing right into the slow cooker, into the crock pot, but we're not gonna do it that way. But feel free to do it that way if you want. If you don't feel like cutting this up into chunks, that's perfectly fine. So look, we have a lot to talk about in this video, so let's get started. What we're gonna do for a classic beef bourguignon, you want this pork flavor. It's gonna add a ridiculously excellent flavor, okay? So what we wanna do for that is we wanna cut up these chunks of bacon, right? And we're gonna use this bacon later at the end as a garnish. So we want to get it nice and crispy. But what we want to do also is get the pork fat from the bacon, and that is what we're going to use to brown our meat in, because we really need to brown the meat. If you don't brown the meat and get a nice caramelized sear on the meat, what you're going to end up with is kind of like boiled meat, and that's not super desirable, okay? So let's get this bacon into the pan here, and we're gonna brown this up. So this is gonna take about 10 minutes or so. And I have it on like a medium-high heat. So while this is going, what I wanna do is I wanna cut up our pot roast, and this is a chuck roast, right? So I wanna cut this up into large chunks. And that's gonna be like our stew meat, right? So to do that, and you're gonna get all different kinds of meats. You can get a smaller piece than I have here. I'm gonna end up feeding a lot of people with this because it's so delicious. So I got a nice big one today. So we're gonna cut that. Look at all the marbling in here. So the process, this is kind of a tough piece of meat, right? So when you cook it really slow, what's gonna happen during the slow cooking process is it's gonna break down all these tendons and all the toughness that's in this meat, and it's just gonna have a delicious, excellent, awesome flavor, okay? So I'm just so excited about doing this. I can't wait to eat this later. So look at this, I'm cutting this up in pretty large chunks here, right? And we're gonna end up searing it, so it's gonna be nice big chunks of meat. So look at these nice big chunks of meat, right? This is gonna be our beef stew. So let's go check on this bacon here. Let's see how that's going. I'm gonna turn that up a little bit. Get this process moving along. So here's our crock pot here, right? So our crock pot, I have it right now. I'm gonna put it on a high setting. I don't know if you can see that, but I have it on a high setting now. And then the reason I do that is I want it to get hot in the beginning, but we can't keep it on the highest setting throughout the whole process because over the course of 8 or 9 hours, it's gonna burn, okay? The meat inside and the sauce and everything, it's gonna end up burning, and we definitely don't want burnt anything, okay? So let me finish cutting this meat up. See how I'm doing this? Just cut big, large strips here. And your meat might be a little bit smaller, it's okay. Look at these chunks. Beautiful. If you want, you could do smaller chunks. And like I said, if you really want to just cook the whole thing whole, like a pot roast or just a big roast, feel free to do so, okay? That's just not what I'm doing here. You'll get very similar results, okay? So you could use all these exact same ingredients, only keep that pot roast whole, that chuck roast, but feel free to do that. You'll have excellent flavor, it's gonna be delicious. I just like doing it this way. Then at the end of the process, when it's all done, we just scoop it out, put it on our plate and eat it. We don't have to worry about cutting it up or breaking it apart, and sometimes it gets stringy. So I like this process better, okay? Let's check back on our bacon here. All right, so now while that's browning still, let's cut up our vegetables, okay? So, this is some classic stuff, right? So we're gonna just have some nice carrots, some nice root vegetables. So now I'm gonna put these carrots into the crock pot. I kind of got a mess going on here, it looks like. All right, there we go. Now I'm gonna get some onions into our crock pot. You want medium-sized onions. You don't have to dice it up too small, but you don't want big, huge chunks either, okay? Beautiful. Now we have some celery. Again, classic stuff here, guys. Beautiful. This is already beautiful. Now we want some potatoes in our stew, right? In our beef bourguignon. We want some nice chunks of potatoes in there. And you don't want diced potatoes. You want a medium-sized cut because they are going to break down over the cooking process. But if you keep a nice size, you'll still have some nice chunks at the end. I'm going to go check back on our bacon here. Alright, you can see it's starting to get a little bit of brown color there. You really want it to crisp up. So there's a lot of applications when you're cooking bacon like this and getting it crisp. A lot of people sometimes start adding their onions or garlic at this point in the cooking process. You don't want to do that or your bacon's never going to get nice and crisp, right? So you want to keep just the bacon in the pan when you're trying to crisp your bacon. Otherwise it'll never get as crisp as you want, that nice, rich, brown bacon, okay? So now we have our carrots, onions, and celery in there. I want to put some mushrooms in there. I love mushrooms. Mushrooms are going to shrink. So you don't want to dice up your mushrooms real small. You just want to have nice big chunks like this. Let's get those into there. Beautiful. Let's get those into there. Let's check on our bacon. I can hear my bacon sizzling. It's like snap, crackle, pop. So that means that it's browning, which is excellent. All right, another thing I like to add into my bourguignon is some scallions, some green onions. I think it's a really beautiful, beautiful natural taste that goes along with it. And then I also have some rosemary here, some fresh rosemary. If you don't have fresh rosemary, use dry rosemary. It's no problem, okay? You're really gonna get a lot of flavor out of the dry rosemary over the period of time. And you just give that a rough chop. You know, it doesn't have to be super diced up, but that's about good right there. Let's get that in there. Then I have some garlic that we're gonna get in there. I have about 4 cloves. I tend to like garlic a lot in my beef bourguignon, so I add a little bit more. Some people say I use too much garlic. I don't care what they say, I love garlic, right? So if you don't love garlic as much as me, you can use less for sure, okay? So now I also have some tomato paste, okay? So tomato paste, we're gonna end up adding some stock into this, into the crock pot here. The tomato paste is gonna give it a nice, rich, deep, flavorful sauce, okay? Over that long cooking process. So let's get that into the crock pot, okay? And I have some granulated garlic. You don't want to use garlic powder. You can if you want. I prefer not to. I don't think it has the same flavor. It kind of is like garlic flour. Like it has a really light, different flavor. I like the granulated garlic. If you don't have it, just use whole garlic. Fresh, that's fine too, okay? So our bacon is getting a lot crisper. In fact, it just spattered out at me. So, let's check it out. So look at that, right? These are called little lardons of bacon. So we want crisp little pieces of bacon. So remember, we're gonna use these later. For right now, they're not going into the stew. We're just using that bacon flavor to get onto the meat. So the flavor is gonna be in the stew, but not all the fat in the bacon, okay? So I have a little bit of salt here. And I'm gonna put some fresh cracked pepper. Beautiful. And I have a few bay leaves, right? So here's a few bay leaves. We're gonna put those in there. Now I think the bacon is pretty much nice and crispy. So when my bacon is done cooking, I take a paper bag. And you can do this however you want. This is how I like to do it. So I'm gonna take a paper bag and a paper towel, right? And I just take my bacon out. Let's take it over here. And I just scoop it out like this, right? And then that way all the bacon grease will drain out. And then you could throw that bag away later. And I know I'm not recycling, but I usually recycle, just not right here. Sometimes I have to use the paper bag for cooking purposes. Okay, so now we have this fat in here, this bacon fat, and this is what we're gonna use to sear our beef in, right? This is gonna give it the most incredible flavor. You're just not gonna believe it. So let's get these into the pan. And this is also another, pretty long process. Again, if you don't have time, like if you have to get the kids to school and you don't have time to do all this extra stuff like cutting the meat up or even making sure that everything is in here the right way, you could throw it in the crock pot and you're still gonna get a great meal, right? I'm telling you how to make this the most incredible way, okay? So, it's worth the extra few minutes to get everything done the right way here, okay? So, let's let this meat, I'm gonna sear all this beef off, and then we'll see what it looks like, okay? All right, everybody, hey, we're back. So now, it took about 10 minutes to get this meat nice and seared off. So the importance of that, I can't stress it enough, right? So if you don't do it, you're gonna put all your meat into the crock pot. You're still gonna get a tasty dish, but it's not gonna be as deep and rich and flavorful as if you actually take the time and sear the meat off like this, okay? I got a lot of it in here already, so I'm just gonna put these pieces in here, and then we're gonna finish it off and we're gonna get this going. All right, cool. So now we have all the beef in there, and the last couple things we need our wine, right? This is what makes it a Bourguignon, a beef stew, a beef burgundy, right? So you can really use whatever wine is around. I like to use the one that you would drink, okay? So for here, we had this open last night. My Amy had some of this Petite Syrah. So I'm just gonna use that because there's about a cup and a half left, which is perfect for what we need here, right? So I'm just gonna pour that right in here. And then I'm gonna also add some rich, flavorful beef stock, okay? Again, we're going for perfection. This is what you would use if you're going for perfection. I do this for a living, so I had time to make a rich, flavorful beef stock. If you have chicken stock, you can use chicken stock. If you have water, that's okay, because in essence, what we've done here with the carrots, the onions, the celery, the bay leaf, and the aromatic herbs and everything, we're making a stock, right? So I'm gonna pour it up to there. I added about 3 cups because I had a particularly large amount of meat, okay? So look, I have this filled about 3/4 of the way, and then let's just give it a quick little stir around to get all these ingredients incorporated together. So we have the tomato paste in there, we have the wine, we have the beef stock, the aromatic vegetables, and this incredibly delicious seared meat, okay? So this chuck that's in here. So now, like I mentioned earlier, right? I mean, that already looks delicious. So if you guys could smell it, you just simply would not believe it, okay? So, like I mentioned earlier, this is gonna take about 8 or 9 hours to cook. And I have it on high because I wanted it to come up to temperature. But now that it's up and I have everything in there, I want to put it on low for the rest of the cooking process. Otherwise, like I said, it's going to burn, okay? So it'll cook too fast and it might burn and the meat might not break down, right? So low and slow, that's the technique we're using here. So guys, I will let this go and I'll see you in about 9 hours, okay? So talk to you soon. Hey everybody, all right, cool, we're back. So it's been about 11 hours now since I put this beef bourguignon on, and so I shut it off at about 10 hours. Now the good thing about crock pot cooking is that you can go more or less or whatever works, right? You really want the meat to break down, obviously, so you want to make sure there's enough time. But you know, about 9 hours to 10 hours was probably enough time on low, right? If you had it on high, it would have burned. You know, on low, it was still almost boiling. It was kind of simmering, right? So now what happened was I shut it off at 10 hours and I kind of let it rest for an hour. And so what happened there is you're kind of letting them, and really you should let all meat rest. So when you're letting the meat rest, you're letting it relax and it gets more tender, right? So just like when you take a steak off the grill, or if you take it out of the broiler, whatever, it needs to rest for a minute or two, or 5 minutes, or even 10 or 15 minutes sometimes, okay? So what we're doing here, as you can see, there's some fat on here that came to the top. So we really need to get rid of that fat because that's excess fat. One, it's not really good for you to eat a big bowl full of fat, and two, it just is kind of greasy and not real desirable, right? So look, I'm just putting a spoon in here and we're just gonna skim this fat out. And it's all right if you get some sauce in there. There's plenty of sauce, so you're not gonna be like at a loss for sauce. Another thing we're gonna need to do is that I kept the seasoning light, and the reason I did that is because, you know, when things cook, especially over a long period of time like this, was like 10 hours, you know, flavors concentrate, right? And they get really strong. So if I was to put a lot of salt in here, it can get really, really salty. And you can't undo that. You can always add more, but you can't necessarily take it out, okay? So I kept it light, so once we skim all this fat off, we're gonna taste it, and we're gonna adjust the seasonings accordingly. Let's give this a little stir here. Look how beautiful that is. Can you see that? And the meat is just falling apart tender. Yummy, and there's potatoes in there, and carrots, and onions. There's some garlic, and you see how rich that sauce is? Some people like to put cornstarch or other thickeners in here in order to let the sauce thicken, right? But that's not necessary if you let this cook. And we have the tomato puree in there, right? And so what that does is it really has it very concentrated. So what it does is it forms a natural, reduced, thickened sauce, which is the best kind, right? So let's just keep this simple. So I'm just gonna go in and grab some of these potatoes and carrots, like the root vegetables that we put in here. Let's get those out of there. Another good thing you could do with this is you could serve it with egg noodles like my mom used to do. And I love that. I think that's a great way to do it. You could serve it on mashed potatoes if you want. So now let's get some of this beautiful beef bourguignon out. Beautiful. You know what? I forgot to taste and test the seasoning. So let me taste. You know what? That's perfect, okay? But like I said, if it wasn't perfect, I would add a little bit more salt, a little bit more pepper, maybe a little bit of crushed red pepper if you want it to be a little bit spicier. But this is unbelievable, guys. You guys are gonna love this so much. I wish I could describe the flavors to you more than just to say it's rich, it's flavorful. The meat is just falling apart, which is what you want, right? The fat that was in the meat and the connective tissue that was in the beef, it kind of just melts into the meat over this long, slow cooking process. So look, now that it's done here, right? I have this all plated up here. I'm gonna just, remember this crispy bacon? Remember we used the bacon fat to sear the meat in? Which, by the way, look at how the meat, can you see that? How it's seared, that color on there. It's unbelievable. It's just worth every extra minute it took to sear that meat off, right? So, because it's such a richer flavor. So I garnished it with the crispy bacon that we used early on in this process. And then I'm also gonna give it a little bit of parsley, a little bit of green there, and then some fresh scallions that I chopped up. Now look at that. Tell me you don't wanna just dive right in here right now. It is so delicious. I did taste the piece earlier. I know that it's great. So look, if you have any problems with this, let me know. If you did something and it didn't work out, let me know. We'll see if we can work on it together, okay? So beef bourguignon in the crock pot. I hope you enjoy it. Have a wonderful day today, guys.